Plus, Ultra presents The Grey Lodge, Peter J. Carroll's The Apophenion. I am Jin the Ninja. I'm usually joined by my three other co-hosts, but tonight I have a special. I call him Lil Naga, but then he came on mic, and I was like, "Oh fuck, I better not call him like any diminutive names because he has a deeper voice than me." I won't give you too much. Dawnlander, thank you so much for coming. It's been my mutual for a while, but now he's become part of the lodge and we talk all the time, so it's like he's a really cool dude, and he has my full respect and my trust, so thank you so much for coming. Let me just plug the other co-hosts, and then I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but you can if you have anything you want to say, or like a theme that you want to give, because I know you bought this book. You were one of the rare ones who was like, I want a hard copy, and obviously you sent a pic of it, so I appreciate that greatly. I chose this book, so I felt like a lot of responsibility to carry to have the series going, and I think that it was like a mixed reception, but I feel like we did it justice. It was always a really exciting work for me. I love Peter Carroll, RIP. He was the real one, not Gordon. Sorry, Gordon. RIP to you also. But I feel like this was the work. I think, well, this is an interesting work from my perspective, from the Aeon of the Daughter, from what he talks about. I mean, he opens it basically saying that this is the Aeon of the Daughter. He's like, this is the daughter of the Chaos Star, and she is in herself the connections we make through Kabbalah. So yeah, pretty I don't know. I was really excited, and I'm glad that also Dawnlander was excited. But anyways, you can check me out at Threshold Saints on, obviously, if you're watching the YouTube live. Like and subscribe. You can find us all there. Yes, including Dawnlander's X link. That is also in the show notes. I was kind of on it tonight a little bit. You can find Solar Exile, who's my frequent co-host on Threshold Saints, as well as obviously a co-host on this show. We will be doing Michael Hudson's Temples of Enterprise. That will be starting next week, and I will announce it, and the YouTube link for the premiere of that will go live tomorrow. So everybody can check that out. That is Solar's choice, but our other co-host, who sometimes comes, Seth, he's a big he calls himself a gorilla. I still don't really know what that means. It has something to do with the ACP. I'm not in that, so I don't really know. But he was like, you need to read this book. And I was like, okay, I'll look at it. And then I was like to Solar, like, this was a suggestion. What do you think of this? And he got really excited, and I was like, do you want to do this? Is this like something you'd like to lead? And he was like, yeah. So yeah, it's his choice by proxy of Seth. So thank you both. Check them out. Check out Solar Substack. He just had an episode drop on my show, Sinister Forces. Yes, the Peter Levenda book title, because that book did come up in the episode, and it made sense. It totally made sense to the nature of the episode. Of course, Joshua the Branch. Joshua and Seth both have an episode coming up on Elden Rings. I don't know when that will drop, probably in the next 4 weeks. Eros has an episode that is coming up sooner. Everybody can check her out, Eros to Ethos on X, or Eros up on Eros up on YouTube, sorry. Eros up on YouTube and Eros to Ethos on X. Everybody can like and subscribe to her. She also has an episode on Threshold Saints coming up. And of course, the one who made it, my Octarine friend who has the pink PFP. That's how I remember him. I mean, that's not how I remember him, but I associate it with him, and I know that if I post something with the Octarine colors, I pretty much will get a repost. Not always, and that's fair, but pretty much I do. And so I really appreciate him coming. I did read a really great note that he made for me in the second arc, so arc 2, so everybody can go listen to that on the book, and it pretty much blew everybody away. He is our math guy. He is our spooky computer guy. Dawnlander, do you want to say anything or plug yourself or your Twitter?
Hey, Jin, it's great to be here. Sure. My Twitter is sun_rise_coast. But no, I'm just super excited at this opportunity. Jin is one of the great teachers Twitter, and I just consider myself another one of his students. And no, this book is it's amazing. It was a great choice, and there's really something in this book for everyone. I mean, it brings together psychology and ontology, physics, and mythology, and everything. And so he makes a lot of provocative claims, but it's definitely one of the most just broad and far-reaching books that can stimulate discussion, I think, among any group of people. So I'm very, very happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me on.
You are most welcome, and thank you for saying that. Although you know this, that I eschew any label as a teacher simply because I'm not a teacher. I'm just a smart guy who knows a little bit about magic and a lot about tantric Buddhism and a little bit about chaos magic, maybe more than a little. And so I just try and marry, and obviously I have a deep love for Jewish Kabbalah big time, at which this book also talks about and touches on. Maybe that is why I'm excited, because it marries at least two things that I'm deeply in love with, which or three, because it's about the daughter, you have Kabbalah, and you have chaos magic. I mean, you can't really, I mean, those are like, you're hitting it for me. So that's basically it. So thank you so much, Dawnlander, for that. That was really nice. Again, I'm not a teacher. I'm just a sorcerer on the carnal ground. That is not just a bit. I really don't know that much. I'm just try and put things together and give people like a metaphysical framework that they can try and understand the world. I try and look at the world through Kabbalah. That is just my natural sort of inclination. But for me, Kabbalah is also Vajrayana. Like there's no distinction. I just switch frameworks, like in my mind. Like I just think, instead of saying, oh, Longchenpa said this, I just think, okay, Isak the Blind said this. And so that is I just switch where I'm thinking about. But it's basically the same thing for me. So as we always say, for the Grey Lodge, we come together in consent, transcending time and space. We're a metamagical group. Everything we say is speculative. This is a show about speculative ontology, as is Threshold Saints. Hopefully, I believe it personally. I believe it's the new Aeon. I believe we're entering the Aeon of the Daughter. This is why I like the Octarine colors, because I think these are also the Aeonic colors. And that's also what makes this book exciting. And it's kind of edgy. And I think I like that. I think I like it's edgy, but it's not like, we're not going into like the full on, like, this isn't like satanic black metal necessarily. This is more like cool hipster, kind of like, I would say, yeah, it's shoegaze, but it's like heavy shoegaze and maybe a little rare esoteric breakcore, mixed up nice together. So that's basically it. Sorry, I didn't mean to go on that long about it, but I do also love this book, and I think it does have something for everybody. And I think if you go back and listen to the first two arcs, they are really interesting, and I think we actually did a great job, because Peter Carroll's not easy, especially this book. Like, if you're not aware of his breadth and body of work, I think that people will struggle. And also people who are very into specific kinds of, like, if you have a more fixed worldview in terms of math and science, like how you believe the universe to function, I think this will be very challenging. And I think if people go back and listen to the arcs, I think they will hear that it was challenging for all of us. And then, but that is kind of Peter Carroll's thing. He always would say, I fight with K-ball. So I also fight with K-ball. So I feel like that's what makes the Grey Lodge interesting, of course, but also, like, this book, I felt, it was our first book club after coming onto YouTube from Spaces, and I wasn't sure how I was going to go, and I was nervous. I'm not going to lie, but I feel like I trusted in the daughter, I trusted in Apophenia, and I let her sort of lead us through the carnal ground, as I always like to say, and into something more interesting, the gate of higher knowledge, the gate of death. So I hope I was able to do that, and hopefully I can do that tonight. So let's see, where we go. I'm just going to open the PDF to where we left off. I think we're right about here. Okay. Dawnlander, just mute yourself because I'm echoing a little. I'm not mad or anything. I'm just telling you. Just when you're not, yeah, there you go. Okay, perfect. Don't worry about anything. Technical difficulties happen. We all have them. I rage quit in the middle of a live because my mouse wasn't working. So it happens to everyone, and I'm still getting used to doing lives. So we're working through it live, real time. Okay, so I probably should have had Apophenion open in my own. Oh, I do. Yes, I do. Actually, I'm totally on top of it. So we're actually going to start at the fifth principle of thermodynamics, which is chapter 7. So here we're going to see. I'm going to read something from the top of chapter 7, which is not open on screen, but I can open both at the same time. Okay. The Kabbalist may prefer to view the tree as top down. The scientist, wisdom scientist, I think that's what he means, may prefer to view it as bottom up. The panpsychist reserves judgment. Chapter 7, Illumination, question mark. Throughout recorded human history, some people have always sought some kind of transcendence in the idea of gods or higher states of being, or an expectation after death, states in which they somehow achieve union with something far greater than themselves, metastasis. Mostly this has led to ghastly disaster here on Earth. Correct. Nevertheless, such ideas stand as a tribute to the power of the imagination and an insult to the theories of cybernetics. Well, at least the Donna Haraway cybernetics. At least one species of organism in the universe can imagine a greater state of complexity than it poses itself, even if it usually comes down to fantasies about bigger wings or greater destructive capabilities, or merely some elaborate excuses for burning a few enemies at the stake. Correct. This chapter seeks an apophenia in the most despised of all the classical arguments for the existence of the gods, the ontological argument, which basically says that if we can imagine them, they probably exist. So this has been a common theme of contention in general for me personally, but also for not really Threshold Saints, but definitely on Grey Lodge. The nature of the deities. Do they exist or do they not exist? I've always gone a very Buddhist understanding that they both exist. It's both real and not real at the same time. Which this is the true Buddhist answer, the non-dual Buddhist tantric answer. Okay, but for me, that I'm not negating them because in Nagarjunian logic, negation is not refutation. I understand that as a Kabbalist, as um, in Western philosophy, that negation can be used as a refutation of certain ideas. That's not how it works in Tantra. So I've always taken that approach, but because most people don't have that background where I'm very comfortable with that, people have often interpreted what I've said as a negation or refutation of the gods themselves. I'm not saying that. I'm simply saying that Buddhism looks at the ontological character of reality, meaning that it is largely, but not exclusively, a domain of the mind. But it's not dhyana, it's not mind only. It's just that we are the perception, we are the witness to perception. We are the ones who perceive reality as cause in the universe in phenomena. So the deities arise also from that primordial ground of perception rather than existing exclusively by themselves. It is a law of dependent origination. So Peter Carroll talks about this in terms of thermodynamics. Now, as everyone knows, I am not a math or science or computer person at all. In fact, I'm probably the antithesis of all of those things, not because I am against them. I'm naturally inclined to the artist, to the magician, to the poet. I hate that word, but people understand, like, who have like listened to the show or follow me on Twitter. That is more my style, and that is more where I'm comfortable. I'm not, the hard sciences. To a degree, I understand it, but it's also like it feels unfamiliar, like an unfamiliar language. But I relate a lot. What I'm trying to say is I relate a lot to this dialogical. I'm calling it dialogical. Obviously, thermodynamics is not dialogical. But in a K-ball way, you can understand perhaps this dialogical relationship between the deity and the Sephira through the laws of thermodynamics as explained by Peter Carroll. I'm not saying that his ideas of thermodynamics are perfectly correct, and I would say a lot of the way he writes is not perfectly correct, and I feel like partially it is his own ideas. He's kind of coming from this outsider perspective, this liminal zone of magician writer. So he's not exactly writing as a scientist, but he's familiar with these theories and sort of like the chaos physics of which he pioneered. So he reformulates them into his own ideas, his own language, his own framework. It's not perfectly meant to relay the pure science of it. It's not meant to be. It's meant to be a challenge. It's meant to be challenging. It's meant to be adversarial. It is he even likens Apophenia, the Chaos Star Goddess. He likens her to, I think it's Satan or Sataniel or Lilith or Lucifer or I think he says female Lucifer. So it is. So there's an innate. What I'm saying is there's an innate Luciferic force, meaning that you have to follow the daughter, just like a Dakini, follow the daughter through the carnal ground that is the text, that is the actual Binah, that is the, black ink on the white page. You have to follow her, follow that spark of truth, even when she's elusive, even when she's not fully in view. You have to follow her along and sort of find the truth within the words themselves, and it's not always in the word itself. It's not literal. We cannot read this book as literal. Yes, he references real material science. That's really important because I think it gives like a basis and a groundwork for other people who are more based in those ideas to sort of make their own path workings. But I think for like someone like me who's more based in magic or metaphysics at least, I'm already comfortable with making those in general correspondences, which is who Apophenia is. He posits that she is the daughter of making these Kabbalistic correspondences and path workings, and it is about the meta text. Like it is linking the text to these other fields of inquiry, to these other ideas, these other fields of study, and being comfortable that there's not always a resolution to paradox. Now, every great Kabbalist wants to resolve all paradox. We want to resolve the paths between the Sephira. But one thing I've really come into understanding of more recently, maybe in the last 2 days even, is sometimes have been multiple periods in Kabbalah where you have to discard the paths, where you have to say fuck off. I mean, you don't have to say that, but you can say that. And you have to think of them like shards of glass. The Sephira are always there because that is the sparks of splendor. Those are the flames, the creation of that's the emanation of all reality. However you understand that, and there's been multiple formulations. Ein Sof Or is a recent formulation, or Ein Sof is a even more recent reformulation. Ein Sof is a recent formulation, only from the 12th century. Ein is a more recent formulation, only from the 9th century. So, like, you have different ways that the dew comes into material reality, and different ways that the dew is understood, or the lightning strike, or the dragon, or Hashem, or whatever you want to call it. There are different ways that the spark of splendor is understood to emanate into reality. So, why I'm saying that is because you kind of have to be okay, as I'm saying, with a kind of paradox, but you also have to have your own worldview. So this is something that Peter Carroll has rightly gone criticized, both on the first two parts of this space as well as just in general in his career, is that he tends to take a more flexible framework. But as I read in the introduction for chapter 7, he posits the panpsychist, the follower of the daughter, you could say the scions, as I like to call them. We're okay with it because we can recognize that the paradox is really about worldview. It's not really about the nature of reality. We're constantly increasing our ability to articulate, to reconcile, and also to renew ideas that are trapped maybe in the smoky palace of wisdom. And that is a big part of why it's the Aeon of the daughter and not the Aeon of the mother. We're not trying to we're not trying to resolve the sins of Babylon, you could call it, in a mythopoetic way. We're following this new spark, this new flame. We are looking at the ways that we can make new connections, both with each other. Of course, love is one of the primary movers of the Aeon, if not the primary mover. At least the first cause is love, so we'll go with that. Will and love together, obviously. Will, love, and life, if you want to be truly Aeonic and use the Trinity. But that's what it is. We have to be comfortable with certain degrees of paradox. But it's also, we have to have a functional and coherent worldview in and of ourselves. Now, this is really difficult because obviously it is an aeon of decoherence. So, what do we believe and why? I think that's a good question for looking at Peter Carroll, and then I'm going to read a little bit on thermodynamics. And then if Dawnlander wants to say anything, he absolutely can say anything. And please feel free, Dawnlander, to jump in at any time. I'm not always looking at the screen, but I will come back in like a minute. Life on Earth, for example, does not really depend on energy from the sun. It depends critically on the sun having a much higher temperature than the surrounding space. Life exists here because it exploits the energy difference between the sun and space. It absorbs the relatively high grade solar energy and excretes the lower grade heat back out into space in a more entropic form. If we had a uniformly warm sky instead of a generally cool sky with an intensely hot spot in it, then life could not exist. See, even this is a very grade school example, but you could easily like I could well, at least I could, and probably other people could, but you could easily translate this into K-ball. It totally makes sense. The sort of Gevuratic force of Tiferet, so the martial force, the martial element of Tiferet, which has an equal portion of Mars in it, as well as Hesed or Jupiter. And remember, the planets are not the Sephira, very different, but they are grades of, or octaves, or densities of the same idea. Okay? So when we're talking about Tiferet, we have to also talk about the heat of Gevura. That has to be displaced. How do we displace it? Well, we displace it through the mercy of Hesed, the waters of Jupiter. Okay? But it's not the heat. The heat is really about discernment. This is how I like to explain it anyway. It is about Dean, not just Gevra. It's not about war. It is about discernment. It is about utilizing the reins of foreknowledge and also like will. And where do you want to go? We are not just going to be taken by the waters of Jupiter. We are actually going to, or the infinite waters of Hesed, we are actually going to control where the arrow or where the lightning strike falls. So this also happens at Tiferet. This interaction, this very nuclear, to use something that Dawnlander posted today on X. I love to bring these things up because I always feel like they have a, it's a connection. It's like it's a path working in a way. So this is the Tiferatic sort of synthesis is really about nuclear power, in my opinion, like at least one element of it. So you have this cool sky, this cool Hasidic sky. We've talked about this 10 million times. The Hesed is the sky, the supernal waters in a way, and in the space between, also the upper waters and the lower waters, the tension between creates lightning. But it's the cooling element of that. It's the way it takes heat away, so the fire can be then heatless. That is exactly what he's saying. And so, but the fire is also of life. So we're not discarding Gevra. We're not like going full from or Hasidic. We're not discarding the heat of Gevra. We're saying, okay, we need to be able to tame it. We need to be able to control it. You need to be able to synthesize and rectify, which rectification happens at Yesod. This is also interesting in relation to heat because heat is dissipated into space, but it also falls onto the moon, and the moon reflects it with cool light. So you could say that to the sun's heat, the moon's sort of has a more fundamental Hasidic nature. So it's able to cool down space around it or the light around it. So this is really good, useful for thinking about Kabbalah in more psycho, I guess is psycho, it's not really psychological or psychoidal or psionic terms. Um, you have to reconcile the polarities in your mind, which is also Yesod. That is what we have to do. We have to reconcile all the paradoxes happen there. And then when we can move up to the six, which is Tiferet, then only when we know our will, our true will, then we can pass the ego and go higher. We can go to Dath. But we must start at Yesod. We must start at the cooler, lower energies. Even the sublunary world, which is also X, Twitter, is also all socials. So anyways, I won't keep going on that, but I just think it's interesting because you can explain sort of the fluctuations. It is the Aeon of Flux, and you can explain the sort of gradients of space because space really is the fifth element. That's the other thing. Space really is the fifth element. So you must, even though that the Western esotericism sort of both ignores and also misunderstands both what space or akasha is, it is so important because it is also partly of the mind. And so you have to kind of understand it in these gradients of like heat, coolness, and because those are the great polarities, right? The heat, fire, hot and cold. That is one of the XY axis of the Aristotelian dialectic, which gives rise to how Kabbalah became like the way it is now. It's very dialectical and it's very I mean there would be no Hegel, as I always like to tease Dawnlander, there is no, and Seth also, there is no Hegel without K-ball because that is what he's talking about and that is what he's drawing from. That doesn't mean we need to get caught up in the dialectics. As I'm positing, Tiferet and Yesod are actually more powerful because this is where we're really interacting with the Sephira at a much more conscientious and conscious position. So we are directly in perception of those things. We are accessing the Hesed of Tiferet, the Hesed of Yesod, when we are in perception of the Sephira, rather than saying, I need to go here, I need to be at this Sephira, I need to go outside the cube, I need to go to Keter, I need to, liberate myself from the, karmic chains. This is really a middle path endeavor. And middle path does not mean centrism or like an eschewing of thinking or even ideology. Although I do like to tease everybody and say, like, don't be ideological because ideology holds us back. It actually holds us in the lowest of the three worlds because if we cannot see higher than the sort of klopothic constructions of our own mind and the sort of klopothic constructions of man, which, everyone has their own agenda, their own will. If we cannot see outside of them, how can we look higher? So Peter Carroll was even talking about this. How do we understand the tree? I always say we need to look up. I feel like this is aeonic. I feel like this is much more. If I was going to give my own spin of K-ball or Tantra, I would say that it's looking up is the most important thing. Now, of course, people can explore the lower tree. I don't believe in the lower tree because I believe that the tree is unified. I think it's a unified field. I do not see a distinction between the Klippas and the Sephira. I think you will encounter both conceptually and metaphysically, however you understand that, through Sephirotic journeys, through meditations on the Sephira or deity or in Buddhism or whatever it is. I think we access the same place. It is just a map of relative degrees of truth. So I think that we need to look up because the Klippas are also there. The traps are also there. The sort of the ways that material reality is, if you want to call it archonic and use a very Gnostic ideas, it's there too. But so is Pardes, so is Diamond Thunder. So you have to sort of break through the Klippas or at least penetrate the densities, however you understand that, to also liberate the light that's trapped within it. But the light is also in our perception because the husks, as we know from Rabbi Lurius, the husks can also be illuminated, excuse me. This is also in a book that I'm very fascinated with currently, which is the Sefer HaBahir, the Book of Splendors or the Book of Illumination. Why is this really important? Is because it's actually older than the Zohar, and it sort of explains the idea of the three outer worlds, Ein Sof, and Or Sof. It explains it before those things were formulated into named territories on the esoteric cartography. It actually references sort of the way that the light emanates both in the we'll call it the orthodox way, meaning that in the sort of series of emanations of the 10 in the principle of mathematics, but then it also explains how it also explains it in the reverse. So you can sort of understand how the densities of the Sephira are created. But anyways, the point is that it is talking about the way that we view it. It should be sort of non-dual, is what I think. I've posited this many times. So this is if you've listened to the spaces or listened to Threshold Saints or me on any other show, this is not a surprise to anyone. I believe that the tree is non-dual. I think we should appraise it non-dually. I do not believe in the klipa because the klipa exists in the upside part of the tree. I think anything that is explained specifically on the klipa, treating it as a separate tree, a physical tree, I do not believe in it because I believe it is just a reflection in water. It is a reflection in the primordial waters of the upward rising tree. It is as ephemeral as anything else. The Sephira are real because of the klipas, meaning that the husks that contain the light, what we call them, that makes them materially real, and it also makes them the klipas themselves. So why do we need to journey into a realm of the imaginal, of the sublunary that doesn't exist? People can obviously do what they want. I'm not anti-klipa, and I'm not even anti-left-hand path ideas of looking at them. I just think that a lot of that stuff is made up, and what does that even mean in terms of magic? I mean, you could say all wisdom science has an element, a degree of parafiction or metafiction. That is, of course, true, as we've discussed many times, as much of this book is about. But I also think that it's based on actual experiences, experiential wisdom, the true Hokmah of it all. It is based in that. And so, even though an author might misinterpret or misunderstand or deliberately do those things or misarticulate, it's still referencing something real. It's referencing something that many people can experience and have experienced. So many people have a deeper understanding of what those things are. So I believe that the carnal ground, as I said, the carnal ground and the garden are the same thing. They're the same place, but we see it differently depending on our own state of consciousness. It's very Buddhist, very tantric, right? So that's why I don't distinguish the klipa from the sephira. I think it's a unified field. I think it's one on one, if that makes sense. So let me read this, and then I will actually shut up and allow Dawnlander any moment or any additional or whatever he wants to add. Life here has developed ever more complex and exotic mechanisms for dissipating energy. Herbivores dissipate energy far more quickly than the plants they feed on. Carnivores dissipate the energy of herbivores far faster than the herbivores do themselves. Humans dissipate energy at an astonishing rate. Not content with merely eating the plants and the herbivores and the carnivores, they also dig up the remains of old plants and animals in the form of coal and oil and burn those as well. Well, that's debatable. Anyways, we won't get into that. Recently, they discovered that they could even burn the uranium-bearing rocks forged in the death throes of the previous star in this part of the galaxy. Of course, it always comes down to that kind of Uranic force that is, as Peter Carroll says, that is the father of the daughter. So we're going to follow the daughter. That's his proposition. It's also mine. And so we need the energy. We need the sparks of splendor sort of contain within us. And he even says this, thus the second law of thermodynamics constitutes a tautology. Dialogical, you could say. I mean, I know that's not exactly the same thing, but it's something. It's a direct interrelationship that relies on the perception of one thing and the recognition of the other, that you're in some kind of relationality. So of course it is a system of entropy and also order. That is what Zimzum is, the expansion and contraction of the worlds. I mean, for me, I'm just going to be honest, like the thermodynamic stuff, one could say it's interesting, but I also think I also think it can be explained in other ways. So I'm gonna pass it over to Dawnlander. I'm sorry, Dawnlander, for going on for so long. Uh, I just wanted to like set myself up with like a meaty introduction, so at least I could build off of it later. But obviously, I wanted you here, and I want to hear what you have to say. If you have anything to say, I'm not putting you on the spot.
No, absolutely. That was an incredible introduction. I really have inadequate knowledge of Kabbalah. I have inadequate knowledge of Tantra to um, comment intelligently uh, on exactly what you were talking about. But no, there's a huge space of ideas that are touched on by this book, and yeah, I was thinking about what you mentioned right at the beginning about the Nagarjunic logic, and that's also something that I'm not very familiar with. But the beginning section of this book is all about how sort of becoming and dynamism is, I guess, for Peter Carroll, more fundamental than being itself. And, you know, that is obviously a very big idea in Hegel, where, being is negated once and then sort of resolved in becoming. And so becoming was really, you can retroactively view it as prior to being in the first place. And I just, it reminded me of a certain concept in mathematics that came around in the latter half of the 20th century from this mathematician whose name is William Lavier. And he actually himself was a Hegelian, and he's a devoted communist as well, doing all sorts of activism in his life. But one of the fields of mathematics that he helped develop was called synthetic differential geometry. And in sort of the classical geometry that we've been using ever since the mid-19th century, when it was basically a logically consistent model for a line or a space, was created by Dedekind, that's sort of formulated an infinite line or the 3D space we live in as a collection of an infinite number of points. This sort of new synthetic differential geometry actually managed to sort of do away with the points, and instead it has motion as sort of the fundamental underlying substrate of geometry in the first place. So this has sort of becoming as its primordial object, and rather than being. And there are actually a couple ways that it was formulated in the like the 1960s. There were two ways that were discovered how to do it. One way was to sort of just add more points, allow for the existence of infinitesimal numbers. But the way that Lavier did it was basically doing away with points and in the first place and having sort of a very tiny space being the primordial object. Basically, space is consisted of tiny space that it's a little difficult to articulate. But anyway, the what's interesting about the way that Lavier formulated synthetic differential geometry is that it uses no longer classical logic, which has the law of the excluded middle that says that for any proposition A, the negation of A doesn't necessarily imply A anymore. And the basically logical consequence of this is it reminded me about what you were talking about. We have to there's no longer a way that we can posit an abstract object and like a klipa without witnessing it as a phenomenon in this new kind of logic. And for example, in classical mathematics, there are often existence proofs that are used that say that, well, if a certain object does not exist, then that causes problems for us, or that leads to a contradiction. We can derive a contradiction from the fact that it doesn't exist. Therefore, even if we can't see it or observe it, we know that its non-existence leads to a contradiction. So we know we can say that it exists somewhere, and then we can use that fact that it exists somewhere to reason on further. But so you can reason with an object or work with an object without actually ever witnessing it, or without it being instantiated as an actual phenomenon. But in this new sort of motion only, pointless synthetic differential geometry, that point of view is rejected, and so we have to construct everything that we work with. We have to bear witness to and construct from the ground up. So that I'm not sure whether or not that corresponds to this sort of logic of Nagarjuna, where I guess they have a lot of things like neither perception nor non-perception. So it's like something and its negation don't necessarily, if you say A or not A, that doesn't necessarily cover the entire space of possibilities that exists. And so
That was great. You did great. That was legit. That was so good. Okay, so it's so funny you brought all of that up. Thank you so much. It is something I've been thinking about, like this sort of schism in Kabbalah. So there's an idea of like, so Isak the Blind, who I'm fascinated with. Yes, I've name dropped him a couple times. The idea is he posited, as you were kind of saying, this theory of emanation through Bina, through understanding. He said the drop of dew, the first emanation of God. Remember, God is only seen as Ein. God is not, Ein Sof doesn't exist. Ein Sof Or doesn't exist. It's not in, people don't have the articulation of it. So he says it comes through Saturn, the classical seven. So that's the implication. It comes through the classical seven planets, or the seven densities, you could say. He is saying that that is how we witness the sparks of splendor. We see them, but they don't really exist until we understand them and treat them as fields of inquiry in and of themselves. And so the true nature of God is in the deeper understanding through intellect, meaning that we have to sort of engage with creation or the material reality in order for it to be real, in order for God to be real. Okay, so you had a student called Azrael of Garona, who I'm very, very, I'm really into right now, basically. Solar knows this. I've basically told him all about it. So the idea is, Azrael's idea was that actually Ein Sof is where emanation of God or Hashem or whatever you want to call it. But he's positing that the actual Ein Sof, so for people who don't know, Ein Sof means the infinite one. So Dawnlander was talking about the sort of infinite rays of splendor. This is what I wrote down in my notes, whether this is the right sort of frame or not. Add more points which allow for infinite expression. So this is one of the this is the paradox of Ein Sof, is that it exists in negative space, meaning that sort of like a space that absorbs heat and is naturally cool. That is more the relation, that is more God. That is what God is. He doesn't exist. He's qualityless. He's Pardes. He's Diamond Thunder. He does not really exist outside of our perception. But when the dew or the sparks of splendor emanate forth, the idea is that you cannot subtract from something that is ineffable and negative. You cannot, that would make that God appears in the material world in lesser quality, because if you're subtracting from something, you're taking away its specialness, uniqueness, and unity. So he posited, he drawing from the Platonists, directly from the Platonists, he said, okay, we need this other layer, this Ein Sof layer, he who is infinite. Yes, we will have this paradox that things are infinite in their splendor, meaning that there is this weird thing that happens where uh, the Sephira appear, or whatever it is, or reality appears, but in infinitude, but also like God is best contained in what he called Rum Ma'Allah, which it doesn't mean anything. It's a Sephirotic or Kabbalistic cipher. Another contemporary of his, who's called Ibn Gabriel, he said that it is actually, I'm trying to think of the Hebrew word, chafetz, which means will. So why is this important? Because he's not talking about will in the sensual worlds. He's talking about like this, it's not divine will, as like you have to think this is like a total like esoteric, like this is like deep Jewish esotericism mixed with like Gnosticism and Platonism all at the same time. This is not strictly Jewish even. So they're not talking about like Hashem's divine will emanates forth and that's what the Sephirah are. He is saying it's will without quality. It's like, okay, so maybe I should explain it a little better. The idea is that the Malkuth pre-Malkuth, so the 10, so what we are, so who we are, the Malkuth, he didn't call it Malkuth. He called it Zadi, like the saints, right? That was the whole idea. He was saying that Malkuth is actually the Zadi, and Keter is actually, we're calling it Hafetz, but he didn't call it that. He's saying it's the will. So it's much more Crowleyan. There's something much more talking about like Parsons and like the OTO and like what they were talking about. But what they were talking about wasn't radical, because this already existed in Kabbalistic thought in the 11th century. And this also existed in Buddhism. It's like, what is the higher will? Well, the higher will comes when you, in your own consciousness, have clarified the klipas, have clarified your perceptions, and you can access that Pardes Diamond Thunder layer. So I brought up an icon on screen that directly kind of explains this theory of emanation, which at the time was considered very radical, and of course, directly touched upon by the Platonists, like directly influenced, it influenced Azrael of Corona to understand to reformulate his theory of emanation by adding this secondary layer, right? Because Ein doesn't really exist outside of the tree. Ein is directly related to Keter. But the thing is like Ein limits us to material reality, which is constantly in degradation, because it's a subtraction, whereas his idea is a sort of negation through negation. God cannot be subtracted because he exists in qualitylessness, what we would call Vajrasattvic or Vajrasattvahood or the Vajradhara, something like that. But of course, Buddhism also agrees with the much later addition of Or Ein Sof or Ein Sof Or. The older name is Ein Sof Or, but the more post-Lurianic name is Or Ein Sof. And if you go back and listen to my episode with David Heim Smith, his preference is, or he reformulates it, drawing from the post-Lurianic Kabbalists, he reformulates it as Or Ein Sof, because that is the non-dual layer. That is where there is no distinction between any kind of emanation, reality, perception. All of it exists in this panpsychic kind of expanse of hyperspace that is infinite, that is not tied to materiality, that is not strictly about the spirit, that is not even about the self. So this is the other thing that Dawnlander said, resolved in becoming. This is a quality of Ein Sof, resolved in becoming, because you can never really be quality less. It is about the path. It's about the marga. It's about the way the upasaka or the viras, because both of those are similar, not the same things, but the viras, the heroes, they must become salted along the path. They must become. They are not that. The person who just enters the first gate of the temple and learns to pray for the first time, which you could say is the relationship between Malkuth and Yesod, he who is going into the greater carnal ground to learn the ideas, but excuse me, I have the hiccups happen sometimes when I get nervous. Um, he is going into the greater carnal ground to learn the names of things because from Malkuth, he doesn't know the names of things. He's just, it's, you can liken it to a child or a bride. So he doesn't understand the way the world is. But once he understands that there is a deeper metaphysics, he might not even be able to describe it, but he can learn to pray for the first time. And in that first prayer that he encounters, that is the first marga. He enters into the first marga of becoming. So I thought that was really interesting. And of course, as I have said this for 3 years, I know that Dawnlander kind of knows this. I'm not saying he's listening to me for 3 years. I'm saying that he knows that I believe that Hegel was drawing directly from Kabbalah. Because to me, when I read Hegel, it's just Kabbalah. It's not anything else. I understand that other people have different interpretations of it or like frameworks that they say it is, but for me, it's directly referring to this other kind of body of Christian Kabbalah. So I think it's interesting because the becoming thing comes up with like Heidegger. Heidegger is often considered to be the of all the Western sort of philosophy, the continental philosophy, his is considered to be, I'm not saying that I consider it to be, but I'm saying that a lot of other people consider it to be the most parallel to what is called Eastern thought. Now, everybody knows that makes me vomit to say that. I don't like that kind of paradigm of like East v West. I don't think it's real. I'm a Central Asianist, obviously axialist. So I don't really, I'm not comfortable with like the extreme of the binary, but that's fine. The Heidegger is also important because not only because he provides this kind of a little bit non-dual layer, he also sort of speaks to this kind of introduction of early Buddhism and Dharma more broadly into the West. And he does engage with it as much as the translated text exists. Now, for me, I don't understand Heidegger at all. I don't really understand Western continental philosophy at all. You might as well give me a textbook on thermodynamics because I'm going to understand that a lot more than I'm going to understand Western philosophy. I don't know why that is. I'm usually good with words and those ideas, but I don't understand. But Hegel, I kind of understand. And I told Dawnlander this and the group, I think more broadly, but what a lot of what clicked for me in terms of getting better, improving at Kabbalah in my own personal study was actually listening to like Marxist podcasts where the people were much more Hegelian and much more dialectical. And they could describe dialectical changes in discourse. That's basically how it kind of clicked. I was like, wow, this is actually like so similar to Buddhist logic, like tantric logic, not just Nagarjuna, but tantric logic in general. There is this idea of the inner, the outer, and the secret. So the two extremes of the polarity, and then the secret third thing. Perhaps that's synthesis, perhaps that's rectification, perhaps it's both. So even if you are not inclined to communism, obviously I'm not, but or even Hegel, it is actually really useful, and it's useful to also treat, Hegel, specifically Hegel. It's useful to treat not just his alchemical treatise or his ideas of, metaphysics, but it's actually useful to treat his entire body of work as he is a Kabbalist, and so, read his works in light of that because actually it helped improve me, who often brags at least, whether it's true or not true, it's all speculative, but who often says that he is the one of the best Kabbalists on the internet currently. Um, that is obviously a little bit of a little bit of a joke, but it's not really at the same time. I'm pretty good. Um, but, I think that it would be really useful for people to think of it like that. And then also look at how Hegel is relational to Western philosophy in terms of the metaphysics. So I said Heidegger. That often comes up. He seems almost like the normie example. But to bring up like Evola, like I'm not the Evola guy, Solar's the Evola guy. For sure. You can go listen to that episode 54, if you're interested in that. But he's also talking about like the path of the initiate, the path of becoming. It's all interrelated. And then when you're talking about Evola, he's talking about Buddhism, he's talking about Indian Tantra, not necessarily Buddhist Tantra, but Indian Tantra. And so we have to also accept that the ideas are arising from this conceptual or speculative world island. So to update it and bring it back to Apophenion, why is this interesting? Because Peter Carroll is really the one who introduced the ideas of the octarine colors, which I cited, and like Dawnlander and I both love the octarine colors. It can be gradients of purple, pink, green, or turquoise. So there's at least four distinct colors, although you could say it's plus ultraviolet. You could also say it's that with a green flash. That's perfectly acceptable. But I like pink and green. That's always what I used to see when I used to really be into the sort of meditations on the colors. Those were really important to me, but now I've kind of learned to accept that, like purple, which is a deeper density. Purple's a densifying color. It's not a Pink is much more related to Keter, much more related to Tiferet. There's the pink ring at Tiferet. Tiferet also has a green flash. So I'm just saying there's a very Tiferatic element to all of this, but pink also appears at Yesod. So it's very important. It's like the pink and the black, like the space, like Peter Carroll was talking about. Like, how do you get to the heatless flame? Well, you get to the heatless flame through space, through the dark side of the moon, if you want to call it that, where the hidden gate to death is. The hidden gate to, you could say Pluto, that's one way, or you could say Uranus, that's another way. But it's at Yesod, it's at the dark side of the moon, and it's pink and black. And so pink is a cool color. It's a Diamond Thunder color. It's the color of the Crystal Millennium Kingdom. Shout out Sashki. But anyways, yeah, it's the sparkling sort of silverine color that doesn't really exist. Our perception puts pink on it. So that's how we understand it. And like a flower, because those are the things that are mostly pink in this world, a flower is ephemeral. It comes and it goes. It's the perfect metaphor for samsara and the perfect metaphor also for higher knowledge. This is also why I don't map death to the tree personally, because higher knowledge comes and goes. It is created when we accomplish the acts of both rectification and synthesis. I agree. Shout out Cassandra and also Vanessa in the chat. Sorry about that, guys. I know we're 56 minutes in. Cassandra, our most loyal psionic soldier, obviously a threshold saint. She has been on Saints. Her episode's also coming up. She has an Etsy store. She's a content creator in her own right, and she is an astrologer, and she also offers tarot services. Everybody jump on that, check them out. Follow her, Spotless Mind Tarot, or at her Etsy store. You can also follow her on X Twitter. Of course, Vanessa, you can follow her, Truth and Dies, on Etsy or IG. She's a awesome addition to the Grey Lodge. She also joined us for the at least two of the spaces that we did on Battlestar Galactica, Lords of Cobalt, which is what I called that series, which also ties in very much to the Octarine colors, because that is something that in the 1978 series, at least, you see them reuse as I used for the keynote. So if you don't believe me, you can just go look at the title cards that I used. But you can see there's a pink flashing off of the stainless steel Cylon. Well, one of the ideas in Tantra is that the octarine color, at least this pink color, emerges as a halo when someone or the deity, we'll just call it the deity, but it can also refer to the upasaka, undergoes the process of vajrification or adamantization. Both of those are perfectly acceptable as synonyms of each other. So the adamantine sun, this is something that I've talked about a lot in terms of Aeon of the Daughter. It's both the Aeon of the Sun and Aeon of the Daughter. We're marrying those in the alchemical wedding. What does that mean? I don't really give it a meaning in terms of like how you should live your life. I personally think it's through will, love, and life, and that is how you should embrace the Aeon, whatever that means for you. I tend to think of things in the middle path, as I said. So that's how I choose to live my life. But of course, people can do whatever the fuck they want. I don't know. Don't listen to me. But I also think that there is a higher order kind of ways to align with the Aeons. And I don't necessarily think it's through order. Now, this is something that Eros and I have discussed a lot. What is the sort of can you align yourself with the entropy? Or should you be completely aligned with like this? Can you be chaotic good, or do you have to be, whatever the other thing is, good order? Do you have to do like like good order, or do you have to be chaotic good or chaotic neutral? Is that possible? Or is all chaos evil? Maybe that's an idea. Okay, that's more Eros' thinking. But for me, I actually think that the true neutral position is chaos good, simply because I think that we live in a world of flux, an aeon of flux, and an aeon of decoherence. And so, if you move strictly in an orderly thing, like if you strictly enumerate the Sephira as being 1 through 10 in this specific way, as descending, the lightning strike descends from the higher order, and we are just the passive receptacles to that energy. Or if we are, we are truly left-hand path and we take control over our true will and we know what that is and we want to rise as the dragon through the tree. I agree, of course, though both of those things are real. But I also, as I was saying, synthesis and rectification. The lightning strike exists within our perception. The Hesed exists within our perception. We are also the dragon. That's why we use not use, but that's why it is the Aeon of the daughter. It's love and will together. We don't need to imbalance ourselves. It is the Aeon of justice, the justice card. We've talked about this a lot. Now, I know this has gone away from Apophenion textually, but I don't think it has, because I think this is what it is. She is the Chaos Star Goddess. How do you follow the Chaos Star? Well, you can't follow the Chaos Star through perfect enumeration, perfect order. You must allow for that space of Zimzum. You must allow for that space of chaos. So I think it's an aeon of chaos good. That also means that most people, the mass, the ipsos, as Nema would call it, the mass is not going to be aligned. This is why I didn't choose. This is why I didn't choose a Nema book. This is why we didn't do the Aeon of the Daughter workings as she understood them, or the Aeon of Ma'at workings. Although I agree with her premise that the sort of apophenia, the daughter, she is in reciprocity. She is in relational awareness. It's something Dawnlander and I have talked about. He surprised me with how much kind of relational ontology, like indigenous relational ontology, he knew about. And we were talking about like the Gates and the Mohawk and the Menominee and all the different peoples of the East Coast. And so I'm sure I'm forgetting some. I apologize. It is what it is. But what I'm really saying is that I think a relational ontology is correct. But I also think that in terms of the way we have to move through the world isn't strictly based on this. We don't have to position ourselves as either in opposition to the right-hand path or the left-hand path. We can just say that, as Nagarjuna said, I think Naropa, actually, sorry, I think comes from Naropa. So I think, yeah, it does come from Naropa and Longchenpa. The middle pillar is actually positionless. It's non-relational to the other two. Everything happens here, but what we make of it creates the other two, that creates dialectics. But there's a way to move through the middle pillar, through Yesod and Tiferet, with the Samech. Of course, I'm a Sagittarius, so I call it the arrow, but it can be understood in other ways. It can also be understood as space in many ways, because it is represented sometimes by the zero. So this is something I wanted to ask Dawnlander. In what ways does I'm going to look at his name, William Levere, how does he reconcile the paradox of numbers with the zero? Is that important? Is that not important? Am I just too dumb to understand? Does this have anything to do with the points in space, like doing away with the points of space, the multitude of points in space, and resolving it with the principal object, which I would say is the zero? You also mentioned the law of excluded middle. So I felt like that was also important in relation to the middle pillar.
No, absolutely. He does, I would say, resolve it in zero. Basically, what one sort of tendency that he noted in mathematics as a whole was that, if you go back to Newton, or even go further back to people like Archimedes, it's pretty much all of these Kuhnian paradigm shifts in mathematics have occurred sort of at the site of zero, when of course Newton was He developed calculus, and he started working with infinitesimal numbers and started working with, quantities that didn't exist, and being able to, have this very obvious and apparent contradiction, but put that contradiction to work and sort of figure out that inner meaning of what infinity and zero as dual quantities, what that actually means, and being able to um, sort of resolve it and move to a higher stage. And Lavier, his, I guess, entire program was to continue this idea of the formalization of infinitesimal quantities, and the sort of continued reckoning with the idea of zero in order to push forward our um, our knowledge. And I do want to mention that this isn't synthetic differential geometry, isn't just some sort of pie in the sky idle musing. It actually has found very direct application in the solving of differential equations, and especially in the field of infinite dimensional geometry, which that is the geometry of hydrodynamics and fluids, and like air or water or electricity and plasma. Those are all basically continuous media. And so if you, for example, in Newtonian geometry, if you have say a planet orbiting around another planet in three-dimensional space, well, if you just look at if you look at both of those planets, for example, there are two positions that they have. One, has a position described by 3 coordinates. The other has a position described by 3 coordinates. And they both also have velocities, which are vectors. Each vector is also described by 3 coordinates. So in total, we have 12 coordinates. And so the entire state of that system, if we just idealize it as points, points with velocities, the entire dimensionality of that system is 12. And so we can model that entire system as a single point moving through 12-dimensional space. And so if we have a continuous medium like water or air or plasma, it consists of an infinite number of points. And they have, certain conditions, like a continuity condition. You can't break the medium. It basically continuously deforms and mixes, but it does so in an infinite dimensional way still. There are infinite dimensional, and I say points here, but as we found, if we sort of discard this notion of point in the first place, then we can use synthetic differential geometry in order to actually solve equations that could not have been solved using classical geometry. And so perhaps, it might be a more useful and it might be a new foundation for at least certain parts of mathematics going forward. But I guess, I I can't keep up with the huge variety of topics being, I guess, talked about and thrown around here. But one thing I guess I did want to respond to was sort of this idea of chaos that you were talking about, and whether chaos is good or bad. And, I think I mentioned this to you guys earlier, but I guess personally, I really dislike chaos, and I prefer, as you can probably tell, I prefer very rigid and formal modes of thinking where I feel safe. But you absolutely need a spark of chaos in order to sort of animate those forms, to class them against each other in a dialectical way. And, my background really is not in continental philosophy. I don't, consider myself a great, Hegel understander, or I have a passing familiarity with Hegel and with Heidegger and Kant and stuff, but really I was introduced to that entire sphere through Marx, and through even really through Stalin, I guess, was my first introduction to that. And it was very practical, immediate applications of Hegel. And it was basically, Stalin wrote a very short work called Dialectical and Historical Materialism, which basically was supposed to be this, manual for how to use dialectical thought, in real life and in real time. And basically, it consisted of four laws that they're not even really laws. It's just rejections of these false ideas, or these klipas, I guess you would say, that basically inhibit people's thinking. Those were, I guess, contradictions that can't be resolved was one false idea that he said. He said all contradictions can be resolved. That is, it's not monism in the sense of including God, but monism of the universe, that there's only one universe. And not to say that multiverse theory isn't true, but even in multiverse theory, the entire, fractal multiverse is all connected. It's all still connected to each other. And so everything basically is interrelated. And this, of course, you can view it through the Buddhist lens with Indra's net. And so interrelation basically was the first dialectical law. Then the second was dynamism and change. And so there's no kind of static ontology that's possible of having these, unchanging or eternalist, I guess, objects. That was not allowed in Stalin's view. And oh my goodness, I have to say I'm embarrassed to have forgotten the third one. What was it? Oh my, I've forgotten the third of the laws, but the fourth was obscurantism. And this, I guess, is something where he would disagree with Peter Carroll, who says that there's sort of this randomness, or this random layer inherent in the universe. But one of, the assertions, I guess, of his thought was that reality is intelligible and knowable. And if you keep searching deep enough, then you'll be able to find, I guess, what's called now a hidden variable that explains sort of this randomness in a concrete way. And maybe we can't, know the infinite amount of information that exists in reality all at once, but that's not to say that there are, things that are totally closed off to us, at least within material reality. So that's, I guess, sort of the angle from which I always understood Hegel, and from which I sort of approached this sort of dynamic flux aspect of thought and philosophy. But in terms of chaos, there's obviously the famous quote by Mao that all under heaven is in chaos and the situation is excellent. And that, well, chaos is sort of this animating factor, and this sort of, it brings a vitality to whatever situation that you're trying to, understand, or even, as a material, situation. It brings sort of a vitality and a dynamism to whatever is going on. But, in mathematics, there is a concept called the edge of chaos. And this is, it's in thermodynamics, and you can also think of it as a social phenomenon as well. But there are, for example, when water changes from liquid to a solid, the first in water everything is fluid, and so it's a uniform, it's everything's dynamic, but it's still a uniform and undifferentiated sort of substance. And then in ice, of course, everything is crystallized and set into a crystal lattice. But when the water is transitioning from that fluid to the crystal, that period of self-organization is when it displays the most complex and the most interesting, the most uh, you know involved, I guess you could say, the most involved behavior. And that's sort of called the edge of chaos. And I think I posted about this long ago, just a single post, but that is, you could think of that as a revolution in society. When a revolution occurs and society reorganizes itself around new ideas and new lines, that period of reorganization is the most complex and I guess sort of the most intellectually fruitful idea. Let a hundred, what is it? Let a thousand flowers bloom, 100 schools of thought contend with each other. And one thing that I really absolutely love about Threshold Saints is just the sheer volume of different ideas that are being talked about, the different frameworks interacting with each other. And it's really a magical space. And of course, Comrade Lenin instructs us to enrich ourselves with all of the treasures of humanity and all of the fruits of human literature and thought. And that is definitely a strength of Jin and a very valuable aspect of the Grey Lodge.
Thank you so much, Dawnlander. Of course, I'm really no one, but I appreciate that. And Lenin is kind of based. Like, I always liked Lenin. Like, I obviously never identified as a communist, a Maoist, or any of those things. Although I did have a long 20-year arc as like a far leftist, but we don't have to get into that right now. People already know about it. I've talked about it on the show a little bit. You said you did a great job. Like, I know you said you're not a philosophy bro. I knew that. But you are essentially, Kabbalah is just math and science for people like me. It's just for people who don't really understand those things. And so it's more relational to like how we path work. So you said something really interesting right I wrote down quite a bit, but we'll see. Like, we'll just riff with me and we'll just see where it goes. Edge of chaos as the reconstruction of the paths. Like, this is so interesting to me because this is exactly what I was trying to articulate right at the beginning. Sometimes you just have to discard the paths. You have to kind of like let the way that the set formulation has go. And of course, this does relate to like the lattice of crystallization. Interestingly enough, the pillars of the Kabbalistic tree, as it is often relayed. Obviously, I no longer use that model. I do use it and I'm perfectly fine with it. And it's great for mapping dialectics. It really is. Like the way that I'll even bring up an image, but the way that the regular Kabbalistic tree is, it's really good for mapping dialectics, but it's not actually that great for speculative Kabbalah. And anyways, that's sort of not the point. But the greater point, I think, is what was I trying to say? Oh, okay. So the sorry. The idea is that the blue pillar is related to the transitional or transmutational, it's really transmutational states of water. That is really the idea. So Netzach is ice. Hesed is obviously the sort of dynamism, that dynamic interaction between the polarities of the heavenly and the chthonic waters. It's the space in between, the sky, you could say. So you can relate it to water. You can also, but a more technical, alchemical and Kabbalistic and tantric idea, all three, is actually relating them to air and saying that that is actually the Sephira for air. Air in Tantra and in Kabbalah, interestingly, is a composite element. It is the 3 in 1, which also relates to Hesed. Interestingly enough, very closely, like this is what the Ramic was talking about, Rabbi Cordovero, like the 13 as the full expression of God, because what is God? Well, in his idea, we talked about this at the very beginning. And Dawnlander, you do a great job keeping up because I don't even feel like I have a coherent narrative most of the time. I just kind of riff in the ways that I kind of path work in this very chaotic. Yes, I know what I am. I'm aware of it. I'm the, the a scion of the Chaos Star Goddess, and so my job is to sort of shake things up and to bring things into this wild, weird hyperspace and to let people know that it exists. I'm not trying to posit that my path is the path, but I do think it's interesting, just in a general way, that. Sorry, I'm trying to bring up things while I'm also doing this at the same time. Okay, so the idea is that Netzach as ice, Hesed as the water or air or lightning, and Hokmah as water vapor. So the three states of water. Now the red pillar can be linked. I am pulling up a Kabbalah tree, I promise. Once I find one that actually opens. Okay, so basically Hode is the plasma, it's the spark of plasma. You can also say it is Quicksilver. Quicksilver also has three states of being. It's not a perfect way to understand, but you can say plasma. I think that's a great way to understand what it is. And then everything's a WebP file, so I apologize already again. But anyways, so Gevra, it is also plasma, but it's the plasma it's like a very, very heated plasma. It's like plasma in the molten quality. And then when you bring it up to Binah, it is an interaction with material earth, however you understand that. So it is kind of the offset of air, like meaning that air is smoke or gas is produced at Binah, but it's also the heat under the earth. So you're heating, like if you want to think of it strictly alchemically, you can say it is the fire of Gevra pushing on the mantle of Binah. And so I'll explain why this actually relates to what Dawnlander said, and it does. But it is the heat of Gevra pushing on the mantle that is Binah. So it is the creation of a volcano or a heated ground. So it's not necessarily that the ground is lava, although that can be one understanding of Binah for sure, because it is like the slow movement of the plasma, slow movement of matter into material creation, but it actually takes a while. And people will say, "Oh, Binah is like that's the where reality gets fucked up." But actually, no, that's where reality comes into formation. But reality is at that point unstable because we haven't concretized it into text. I know I'm using the metaphor of a volcano. No, I'm not having a stroke. But as John Lander said, Comrade Stalin, I can't believe I'm citing Stalin. He was saying that the relationship of things is knowable to understanding. So to me, he's using that Kabbalistic model, and don't get it twisted. Stalin was also talking about Kabbalah. Like think of Gurdjieff. You have this guy who's from Georgia who probably has Jewish ancestry. That's not required. Obviously, I'm not Jewish, so it doesn't really matter. But and all the Jews kind of eschew me because I'm not, but it doesn't matter. The point is you have a kind of relationship to Kabbalah just through Judaism. That's not the way I understand it necessarily, but I think that Stalin did have I think he was good at metaphysics. I think they all were. I think you can't really not be a sorcerer king if you're gonna, be a revolutionary. That's my opinion. That doesn't mean that I endorse revolutionary ideas. I don't necessarily. I'm a case by case kind of basis person. So, anyways, I think that he's talking about Binah as we were talking about the Isak the blind model, where the first emanation is at Binah. So that is where things come into material creation, and it's also where things go to die. because not die as in necessarily die, but die as in they get remade. This is also what Chairman Mao was talking about. Which can be understood as you can say it's Ein Sof, but that doesn't, for me, that doesn't really. I feel like there's a paradox there. I feel like he's actually talking about Hokmah. He's saying 1,000 or 108 million ideas can take form in the world, but they already exist. That's the whole thing of Hokmah. It's the things already exist. It's kind of the smoky graveyard, the heat without. There's no heat. It's the sparks without potential. It's the flux, the actual metallic flux. That's how you could think of it in alchemical terms, or the particulates of a cloud. We can't necessarily discern what those aggregates are, but they also contain all the building blocks for creation, but they are not brought into formation. What brings Hokmah into formation is either its relationship with Hesed or its relationship with Binah, its relationship with perception or its relationship with understanding. When we are able to bring the aggregates into an alchemical process through understanding, through the actual material fire, the material sort of iambic, that's not the right thing, but um, and for alchemy, the Bunsen burner, we are bringing things into material reality through the flame using the material vessel. That can also said to be bina. So we have to bring those aggregates, those particulates, and specifically the metallic pieces of Hokmah. We have to bring, and also the ice, we have to bring them into it's ice in the very small quantity, right? Or trapping the water vapor and condensing it. That would also be a bina thing, right? Condensation, but we are applying heat to the process. So basically, we are constantly dialectically in this relationship between creation and destruction. But it's infinite samsara, as I like to joke, but it's not infinite as in outside the tree or outside the cube. It's very much contained within our perception of the metaphysics of the universe. The more expansive ideas, the more infinite ideas that we have, Keter and beyond, what can the possibilities of that? That is what allows us to grow the tree and to experience the infinitude of the Dawnlander brought this up. He talked about the sort of panpsychic universe versus like this more um I forgot exactly what you said, Dawnlander, my apologies, but it's the other sort of model. And so the thing, what I like about the panpsychic universe, which you also mentioned, which you said very explicitly, which I deeply appreciated, was that you said it is there's a relationality between the different archipelagos of the world. This is exactly how I understand it. We live in a multiverse, but it is an aeonic multiverse. It's a Keter influence multiverse. That is the pathway, the knowledge that we understand the connections between them, but it is through that unification, that unity, the paths that actually connect the different possibilities, the different potentialities of the world system. So I always call it I forgot what I call it. But anyways, I call it it's the world archipelago. That's exactly what it is. It's the hyperspace archipelago. Obviously, Tracy Twyman talked about this. Obviously, I'm drawing from Tracy Twyman. Obviously, I'm drawing from Peter J. Carroll. Obviously, I'm drawing from Ursula K. Le Guin. This is, in my opinion, she was a great Kabbalist as well. She's Jewish. People don't really know because she called her work Taoist. This is something that is a running joke on saints, is that people will often hide their Kabbalah beneath the sort of edifice of Taoism. This is not incorrect because Taoism obviously has the 64 trigrams, the 10. This is obviously relational to the 10 Sephira. We won't get into that in this space, but they're just, you have to just trust me, or you can go read Crowley, or you can go read Austin Osman Spare, or one of the other people who talked about the I Ching at length in relation to Kabbalah. I am not the only one. I'm not the only one who sees it. So let me just posit it as that. But to sort of exit the cube, to call it that, it's a very gross term. I'm not, that's not really how I understand it, but we'll just call it that. That's a popular Twitter vernacular. Is about the understanding that there are other potentialities, is that we can move from one world island to the next. It's an archipelago. We might be separated through water, through that space that Dawnlander was talking about. There is both an upward space, meaning the sort of supernal waters, the Hesed, that is the air sort of element. And then you have the chthonic waters, the kind of more dense waters that exist as a medium, as an actual medium for us to move through. So it's both. So there's a non-dual element, meaning that the Sephira are not actually distinct. As I often say, people get caught up in both the Sephira and the paths. The paths are not just defined by our will. The paths are not just defined by our karma. The paths are not just defined by us being lacking agency and like or getting lost. We should not relate to the paths like that. The path should be strictly about where are we positioned right now and where do we want to go. It's not about the paths that came before or even our choices that came before that make us arise on the path before us. And this is the same with the Sephira. We do not get stuck at the Sephira because they are actually negative space. They are light traveling through, refracted by their various gemstones. This is just one way to understand. Of course, you can relate the gemstones to the material alchemy of the gemstones, which are obviously informed by the sort of metallic, the compression of the earth, the various minerals that appear and are formed through that synthesis. So that's why I like to relate the Sephira to the gemstones. But of course, the Sephira aren't the gemstones. They're actually the light reflected off the gemstones, if you want to call them gemstones. You don't have to. But this is the same when I hear people talk about, oh, the planets are this, the planets are fixed. Well, this is directly contradictory to Kabbalah, and this is directly contradictory to how I understand sort of the world system. They're not fixed. It's light. How can light be fixed? Light can be resolved, just like sound can be resolved in space, but it's not fixed. This is why I lean on entropy. This is not to say that I can't be friends with people like Dawnlander or Solar or Joshua or Eros who rely more on the orderly conceptions of the universe. I understand that I'm a little bit more wilder, and so for me, I'm going to be more at death more of the time. I recognize that. I have more of the Droyon, the crazy. I know it's called crazy wisdom. That's not a perfect translation either. And I have tried to go away from Hokmah, experiential wisdom, um, being my sufferer of preference, and I've tried to move more into the middle pillar because I feel like death is the way out. The expansion of knowledge also creates the worlds, right? That creates the world island. Like something that we've sort of contentiously argued about on the spaces before is the nature of the outer three, the supernal triad, not including Binah. We're saying Keter, Dat, and Hokmah. What are those things in relation to the Yetziradic astrology? And can you make I'm pulling up the tree. Sorry about that. I kind of went on a tangent. But okay, so basically you can see that I'm trying to bring it to Dath because to me, the daughter is Dath. Love is the cause of knowledge. Lamed Mem Dalit. From the path from Gevra to Hesed, even though Tiferet is not necessarily there, you can say it's there because Tiferet is a star, just like the Chaos Star Goddess. She exists in space, but she also arises on the paths are of man or women, whatever. She arises with us in our perception. We are passing through the gate of heatless fire to Hesed to see ourselves in the waters. But we are actually not getting stuck in the perceptions of what we are or who we are. We're actually going to move forward. So this is what Dawnlander said. He said the word velocity. This is why for a quick minute, I had my tweet of Lance. I forgot who it is. I think it's Hukuhono, a famous surfer. He was a power surfer. That's what it's called. He also was a longboarder, but when he rides a shortboard, he's known for explosive power. So I wrote a Sanskrit word on top of that post, which is called Vajra Vega. 2 V's, yes. Adamantine velocity. So you can hear directly in the translation, velocity. Dawnlander brought up velocity. This is one way to understand the arrow or the samak. This is one way to understand the impulse to take us outside of formal logics and formal knowledge. Because when you're riding the wave, when you're surfing, I'm not the world's best surfer, but I'm okay. Okay, just for the record, like, yes, I can surf, but I'm not great. I've never said I was, but I really love it. And I think I love it because it is like such an amazing metaphor for both Kabbalah and like and Buddhism. We are in the sort of chaos. I know you tied this Dawnlander to Chairman Mao, but I'm going to say it has actually more Buddhist inclination. We are on the carnal ground of samsara, which is not necessarily appearing as a carnal ground. It can simply appear as the infinite ocean before us without end, meaning that there's no land. It's like it's like Noah and the Ark. Obviously, I call all the series for the Grey Lodge arcs, because Nuria, the daughter, at least the daughter in Jewish wisdom literature, she is the daughter. But anyways, she burns down Noah's Ark. So you can take this as a metaphor. She's burning down the formal logics. She burns it down twice. She finds the arcs in deficiency. She is associated with octarine colors. She's also associated with Seth, the Aeon, who's also associated with the will. Nuria is obviously associated with love. That's where Lamed Mem Dalet comes from. It is the love is the heart of Eve, who is Nuria, but she's also apophenia, meaning she's also higher knowledge. Knowledge exists in synthesis, as we talked about. Synthesis is usually a process of Tiferet, but it's not always, because Tiferet is institutional knowledges, and it's also institutional formulations, like what we perceive as outer science. Like, this is something that I really appreciate about Dawnlander. I almost called him his name. I won't, but I really appreciate this about him, because he kind of gets where at least he'll say he doesn't, but to me he does. Like, when he's talking about math things, when he's talking about these more political, like meta political ideas, that is what I'm trying to do too with K-ball. But I'm not necessarily conversant in those words or those languages. So you need the institutional presentation of those formulations, whether you say outer science or you call it wisdom science or you call it hidden science or hidden knowledge. It doesn't matter. What Tiferet is the presentation of those ideas to the greater public. You cannot, and I know this makes me, I'm not a Marxist, and I would be the first to say that I'm not, but this would probably prohibit me from being a Marxist, is that I don't necessarily believe in the potentiality of the everyman, but I believe in the potentiality of everyman. Like, I think it's possible to get up to death. If that's a place, maybe it's not. As I said, I don't really like it on the tree, because I think it gives people the wrong idea, and then people obviously associate with retardational things like, oh, death is the entryway to the klipa. Well, yes and no. When you go to the place where the nothing exists, I'm saying nothing, but there is something that exists there because we exist there, because it doesn't exist. So we go there, a conceptual space, this primordial ground, we go there, and what arises there is of our own mind. So we have to bring it into synthesis to make something grow, or build the mind palace, or whatever that is. That's at death. But there's that relationship between death and Yesod. You need the 5 elements. I know I'm saying 5, but you can, as I said, we can renumber the tree. I'm not saying Yesod is 5, but I'm saying the number of consciousness can be understood as 5. And the number of death is that, as it doesn't really exist, is kind of that reflection of Yesod, that kind of thing that is on the primordial ground, that is not really relational to the rest of the tree. That's what higher knowledge is. So I'm comfortable saying that I believe people can get there. And I would never put limitations on anyone who listens to this space, or who fucks with K-ball or fucks with Buddhism, especially, and say, like, no, you can't do it. You can't have non-dual gnosis. Interestingly, one way to translate dot is gnosis. I like this particularly because in Buddhism, we often translate one of our soteriological goals as non-dual gnosis. The whole idea, especially Tantric Buddhism, we like to say that non-dual gnosis is one of the goals. If you're familiar with the Bodhisattva Manjushri, Manjushri is the non-dual wisdom Buddha. That's what he is. He holds a sword behind his head it's kind of curved. Not curved. I mean, it's kind of I'll find an image. Never mind. I'll let the iconography speak for itself. But what I'm saying is, it's kind of the cutting off of the place between conceptual language and our own minds. So then what arises there? What arises there is primordial. But from Tiferet, we also bring up the will. We also bring up who we think we are, meaning I'm not saying who we think we are as in Hesed. I'm saying who, or Bina. I'm saying who we think we are in terms of ego. You'll hear this a lot on esoteric Twitter. What is ego death? Does it matter? Is it the big, is this the mind fuck of the Jays? No, it's not the mind fuck of the Jays. The Tiferet is about the accessing the higher consciousness, but you have to pass through the ego, which is not what people say it is. The ego is about the lower sort of sensual nature of the will. I'm not saying sensual as in sexual or anything like that. I'm talking about strictly in K-ball terms or platonic terms. I'm talking about sensual as in related to matter. Now, I do not like the platonic or Kabbalistic idea of dividing the tree into the 3-realm system. I like a 5-realm system because I think this also relates the number 10 and to the 0, as Dawnlander and I both have tried to relay, or at least I've tried to relay. He relayed it better, but because he uses actual grounded proofs and theories and mathematics, that makes a lot more sense to do it as that. But as I'm a speculative Kabbalist, I have to do it in my own way. So I think that relating it to the 5 and the 10 make a lot more sense. So I like to say that there's a sort of the 3 worlds. Of course, the Trinity exists. I said there are 3 aeons. There's Seth, Nuria, and Zoe. Love, will, and life. Just read hypostasis of the archons if you don't believe me, or the epinoia of Nuria, or one of the gospels of Set, or one of the gospels of Sophia, and you will basically understand what I'm talking about in general. But you can say that Zoe in particular, the aeon of life, she arises from Tiferet, because a lot of our will actually keep what we think is our will when it's aggregated, meaning that when it is caught in the sensual nature of will, meaning that what do we want? Is it related to our body, like physicality? That is, I'm not eschewing that even. I'm not saying that that's wrong. I'm not that kind of Gnostic. And everybody who's listening to the spaces knows that, but I just want to clarify that. But I'm also saying that sometimes our impulses can either lead us higher or can constrain us to the lower worlds. So once we pass Tiferet, which is the ego in one way, at least the klipa of Tiferet is the ego, what we think we want and how we want to get there, once we surpass that, whatever we're calling the ego, then we can go to death. We have to pass through that Samek. We have to pass through that space. But the space appears as a blazing star. So in our perception, we think that that is the higher world. We think that that is Keter. Of course, Tiferet does offer a path to Keter. Of course, you don't have to have Dath on the tree, which I'm saying is more correct. And if you believe that, then you can say that once you pass through the star or the path through Tiferet, you go directly to Keter. Yes, I believe that. But I'm also saying that if we imagine Dath as a conceptual space, we have to discard the husk or flay the skin, as I would like to say in a tantric way, before we can get there. So if your soteriological goal is Dath, or both, conversely, it is also Kether because Dath and Kether have a direct relationship. You could say that Dath is where the unification of the worlds that exit to another archipelago on the hyperspace kingdom. That is where Dath is. That's why I don't like it when people say, "Oh, it's the entryway to the Klipa." Why is hidden knowledge the entryway to the Klipa? Why is that octarine color? Because that is what Dath is. Dath is the octarine color. Like, make no mistake about it. Yes, I said it appears at Keter, Tiferet, and Yesod, which is true because look at where Dath is. Dath is a middle pillar endeavor, meaning that we have to actually do it. We have to go to Dath. We have to create higher knowledge. It doesn't just exist. It exists on the primordial ground, again, arising in our own minds. So it appears there, but the octarine color is truly Dath. It's not of the other Sephira. The other Sephira, of course, emanate. You could even say, if you want to do a very Kenny G, shout out Solar, or like Tunnels of Set sort of idea of the world, of course you can say that Dath is one of the emanations. It's how the worlds emanate into the Klipas. I again reject that because I think that death is sort of conceptionless. So it's not a klipa unless you actually conceptualize of it. Once you put it on the tree in the way that this tree does, you're actually creating death as a klipa. You are saying it's a material ground, but it's just a gateway that through which we pass through. That's what I posit. And I think that's also what Peter Carroll posits. And I thought it was interesting that Dawnlander brought up the 12 because if you look at I'll bring up the Apophenion book and we'll look at the actual image, and then I'll read something, and then I'll let poor Dawnlander, I'll let him go, um, or let him say anything. So this is the Chaos Star. So why this is very intriguing to me is because it's eight pointed, right? It's the eight cardinal directions. I know I'm saying eight, and there are four cardinal directions, but there are really eight in a Buddhist conception, right? The eight winds. These exist external to us, and then there are two hidden polarities, vectors. The hidden polarities are inside of us, one up, one down. Now, I know Dawnlander said there's 12, and I agree with that. I know, that's crazy, right? Why is that? Well, there's actually a hidden channel within us, the channel of Rahu. The channel of Rahu is also the middle pillar, meaning that is also the synthesis of the internal energy bodies, meaning the subtle energy. Nobody has to worry about this, but this is talking about the breath, how we draw down the universal lightning strike, maybe you could say from Keter, and how we rise up as the dragon from the lower worlds, the lower chakras. You can. I'm not saying that this is exactly how it is understood, but it's perfectly fine to describe it like this, I think. Where those two things, the lightning strike and the dragon, meet, that becomes a channel of its own. It becomes a figure eight. So, again, referring to those eight polarities outside of us, but resolving the polarities also within us, those two extra, the 10. But it also creates a paradox because it creates the one, which is the 11. But then we also know the higher order thinking. We go to non-duality, not the non-duality of death, which is very much relational, as I've tried to make a case for in this space and in pretty much every other space, is related directly, it's in relationship to us, our minds. But once we're getting into Ein Sof, to go back to that, and or Ein Sof, we're going to non-dual states of being. So we're recognizing that the eight is actually just a conceptual way to understand reality. And those eight obviously exist in infinitude within ourselves as well. So we know that there's actually higher places, formless realms. So that's Ein Sof, formless realms. I imagine it, this might be totally wrong, Dawnlander, and you can correct me, scold me if you need to. But I imagine it as a sort of toroidal field. And I imagine Orion Sof as a kind of non-dual point at which energy both upflows and downflows. Like it's kind of like the toroidal point that exists as above and so below, but there's no as above and so below. It's non-dual. It's in the cave, but it's also recognizing that there is no cave. Sort of a paradox unto itself, but at this stage, in Buddhism at least in Tantra, we would say that this is actually where the Buddha, the Adi Buddha, the primordial Buddha, the dark blue Buddha of the night sky, he meets his consort, Samantabhadri. All that is good. She is white, pristine, like diamond thunder. That's how she is even described, resplendent, like a refraction of the starlights in the, not starlights, of the starlight into the blue, the infinite blue expanse of space. If space is not black, it really is blue black because blue has negative light. There you go. Resolution of the three worlds? I don't know. But definitely an interesting parallel between the Chaos Star and the sort of three worlds in Kabbalah, and also the internal channels of the body. We would say it is the one and the zero. Kabbalah also says the same thing. If Keter is not Keter, if Keter is indeed Hafetz, and Malkuth is not in Malkuth at all, but it is the Tzadi, this makes a lot of sense. The saint has to travel. The saint is also, so this is an important Kabbalistic paradox, just for anyone listening, talking about chaos and order, is the saint is also brought into dialectical relationality with the Russia, with the, you could say he's the outlaw. That's how I like to translate it. This isn't perfect. This obviously comes from Rabbi Nachman. He didn't understand the outlaw to necessarily be as cool as I'm making it, but yeah, I think that you can remix it. I think you can kind of spin it and say that outlaw is actually cool in this instance because it's not the idea of transgressivity, although of course people interpreted the Sabbateans and the Frankists, which I don't have that much of a problem with them. The static cabal is pretty cool. For the most part, I don't obviously agree in applying those ideas to politics or the world. I think it should all be resolved inside your own mind. Yeah, please don't do that. But, anyways, the point is, you don't have to interpret the Russia as a figure of transgression, just like you don't have to interpret the figure of the saint as being strictly shamanic or of the right hand path. There is a way to resolve them, again, in the middle pillar, in that positionless positionality, in that non dual space of awareness. I think that they are brought into relational awareness or perception of each other because they are actually supposed to be in union with each other. I'm not saying union in a weird way. I'm saying like that can be friendship, that can be brotherhood, that can be um, someone in your family, it can be various other things. So what they position is like you have to let go of the klipas of your own, like of your own perception of who you think you are. If you walk through the world saying I'm a saint, everything I do is good, all that I do is good, but you're still mired in your own klipothic bullshit. That is just as klipothic as the left hand path. It is actually sometimes more. It is actually more honest to say, this is what I want from the worlds, this is what I want from magic, and this is what I'm going to do to get it. That's more honest. This is my problem with a lot of the right hand path magicians, is because they're not honest. They want to pretend to be goody goody two shoes and fucking clutch their pearls and like pretend that their way is the only way, the only rational way of the universe. And this is something I was saving until we do Temples of Enterprise, which is next week, obviously. And I hope Dawnlander and Seth both come to that, since it's kind of they were the foundation stone upon which that book was chosen by Solar. So I have to credit both of them really. But I want to say that part of the reason why people go on the left hand path, in my opinion, is actually I've come to a different understanding now, a different sort of view or framework. I believe that people come to it because of the rigidity of the sort of I am gonna directly blame the Golden Dawn here, and I'm not sorry, and I'm not gonna ever take it back, and they can fight with me on Instagram all they want or on Twitter, I don't fucking care. The I believe that because they articulate the tree in such a rigid path working, they necessitate people to go to the transgressive side of the tree, and I don't even think the left-hand path is inherently transgressive, just for the record, but I think people take it as that because that's a very dialectical extremist position to take. I believe that they necessitate, yes. I think they are provoking cause by setting the world as they see it, but the world is not as they see it. Even Kabbalah itself does not describe the tree as they describe it. This is a big problem for me because not only does it create paradox, but it also creates the necessity of extremism. Obviously, I try and be middle pillar, so I'm against extremism. This is also a Nagarjunian and a Naropian principle. We do not go to the extremes of the dialectic because we try and resolve them again on the middle path. We try not to be in relative sort of formation with the right or the left hand path. The whole point is to bring plasma and water into synthesis. You want to distill it down basally, alchemically, and say it is the resolution of those alchemical principles. Yesod obviously is our minds, and Tiferet is obviously, in some ways, you can say it's the outer science presentation. We transmute those things like nuclear energy. That's a perfect example. And I'm obviously talking about fusion, not fission. Fission is problematic from a Kabbalistic and a Tantric perspective because we are not trying to create more aggregates. We are trying to bring things into synthesis and also resolve the aggregates that appear both in synthesis and that arose prior to. We are not trying to move forward in the vector with aggregates. We want the arrow, if you want to call it that, to be adamantine, or to be vajrified, to be made diamond thunder. That's what I'm saying about the water and the plasma. It's about both of those things are in relationship with each other. Hod is the spark at the heart of Hesed. You need the plasma applied to the water to create the polarities of the higher and lower waters to create that diamond thunder layer. Just like you need Bina and Hokmah together to create the earth and the smoke and the destruction therein. To move things, to be able to move things through matter that is extremely dense, to move things through space when it seems very empty, but it's not, because again, it contains aggregates, it contains the smoke, it contains the comets, it contains the particulates of ice and the metallic sort of base, the primordial elements that form the basis of creation, the pieces of the stars. So, what I'm saying is, really, I reject that those right-hand path sort of fixed ideas of the world. I don't think it's useful. And I think it's actually cosmologically a dead end. And this is why I prefer Buddhism. And this is also my personal opinion on why a lot of those Golden Dawn assholes, not just them, there's other ones too. I mean, Gordon White was not a big fan of Buddhism either. Like, let's just be honest. And a lot of magicians aren't, because they don't like this ontological layer of reality. They don't like the idea that, yes, you don't need to be pay someone dues. I won't say the podcast name, but there's a different guy who I've been compared to by some people in the lodge. I don't consider my show in any way similar to his. His is a much more philosophical show, much more textually based in continental philosophy. He started a magic school. Good on him. I wish him legit, like, whatever that brings, whatever fruits that will bear, like, good on him. Planting a garden, totally get it. But he's never struck me particularly as a metaphysician. And, like, first of all, if you're not teaching K-ball in your for-profit YouTube courses, you're missing out. You're missing like a huge chunk of the canon. Secondly, you cannot teach chaos magic because you're not a chaos magician. You don't know what that means. So you can't teach chaos magic. You can't teach people how to think ontologically. And that is my point. You don't want to limit people to cosmology. And that is my problem with Western continental philosophy at large. Even with Buddhism, in the way that it's been codified by the institution. You cannot just teach Nagarjunian logic through teaching it. It's not Dharma is Dharma and Dath and all higher gnosis in Buddhism, the truth of the truth, the Omer of it all, the husk that contains the illumination itself, is found in praxis. That is the secret sauce. That is the secret sauce. You want Buddhist sorcery secret sauce? That's it. And so it has to be sort of a process of becoming. And so I don't know where I was going with that, but let me just read this, and then I'm going to let Dawnlander explicate or respond for however long. I know he's going to say I like totally overwhelmed him, which is not true. He is extremely smart, as smart as me for sure, if not smarter, probably smarter. But I know he'll say that because I tend to go in this very apophenic direction, and create the paths as I sort of come across them in my own mind. And tonight was definitely much more of a Jin as the silver surfer, quicksilver surfer. We are trying to resolve the polarities as we move through the tree together, as we move through the text together. So let me just read this. This is the chapter 8, and this will be the last part of the book. Apophenia, seeking mysterious connections, which is why even the reason why I why we do the show, the Grey Lodge, and why I did Threshold Saints, which of course the Saints is a reference to that Rabbi Nachman idea. It's also a reference to the Buddha nature, not necessarily Theravadan ideas of Buddha nature, but the Tantric ideas of Buddha nature, that we all possess it and it's possible in perception. So yes, I'm seeking mysterious connections with my fellow brothers and sister saints. Everybody knows this, especially those in our group chat and who know me personally. Okay, Eros, disordering our carefully crafted expectations. This is the truth of all magic. I think Solar related it last week to the week before to the sort of law of 30 thirds, meaning that there's an idea in magic that only 33% of your workings will come to fruition. This is not my experience. But again, I practice tantric Buddhism, so I do a slightly different kind of sorcery than necessarily ritual workings. Although I would say I'm in ritual daily. Eros distorting our carefully crafted expectations is not a problem for me because I go into every sadhana with the expectation of no expectations. I don't think I'm going to get there. I don't limit myself. I would like to get there, but I don't. I just let it happen. I let it be spontaneous. Zuren, the relationship between Taoism and Buddhism is quite strong. I just let it happen. Wu Wei. I just kind of go in Silver Surfer. I just go with the wave. Let's see how it breaks. Let's see what arises. And then I try and stay on the board for as long as I can. That's a perfect way to explain sadhana. That's why I like surfing as like both a keynote posting and a metaphor and also like an activity because it really embodies like exactly what sadhana is. It's letting it happen. It's not forcing a higher experience. It's not thrusting it through the vector. You are actually allowing it to rise, take shape, and seeing where that flame can go and seeing how far you can take it. Anyways, okay, sorry. Apophenia means finding meanings and connections where others have not. It thus underlies both psychosis and genius. Its occurrence has created progress and innovation in many forms of human mental endeavor. Apophenia has a sister, Pareidolia, who brings visions where others see nothing. Where apophenic insights tend to help in magic and science, pareidolic insights tend to fuel art and religion. In most disciplines, apophenic advances arise fortuitously and accidentally, and the disciplines themselves contain more formal procedures for inducing it. Practitioners just hope that imagination and intuition may eventually kick in. Art has recently experimented with various stochastic techniques. The random fall of paint or the random literary cut-up provide recent examples. The majority of apophenia-inducing techniques actually come from magic and the occult because of their association with sortilege and divination and forbidden realms of inquiry. Kabbalah began as a technique for inducing apophenia. She told me that herself. So I read this in the very first space. Why I read it again? Well, it is, of course, chapter 8, and it is, of course, the invocation of apophenia. And you'll say, well, this is your Arc 3 Jin. This is not, and it's also reaching the end of the space. So why are you invoking her now? Because, as I said, Dath is always there. Dath doesn't need to be mapped to the tree because it's always accessible. We do use ecstatic techniques. We do use, sadhana, mantra recitation. I'm a big fan of mantra recitation. People often, especially at the early part of my whatever, I hate this word, but podcast career, they would email me or whatever. It was mostly email at that time. And they would say, well, how are you doing this, Jen? Like, what text are you using? What practice should I do? And I would be very sincere and be like, don't listen to me. I'm no one. I don't know anything. But in my personal practice, like the way I do praxis, is I do mantra recitation and I follow the text of the sadhana text for the deity, whatever deity that it is. I follow that text and I speak the primordial words in Sanskrit. I might do the prayer in Tibetan, but I always will speak the mantra in the Sanskrit. And I want to say this about mantra really quickly before I pass out over the mic. What people think is mantra, I know that I've been more traditionalist in the ideas that it should be in Sanskrit, and I actually do believe that. I really do believe that. Or whatever liturgical language, whether that is, esoteric Japanese, esoteric Chinese, Siddham, Tocharian, whatever. I don't care. I do think that there should be a magical potentiality in the language, but there is obviously a magical potentiality in English. We've talked about this a lot. It's a very synthetic language. It has a lot of metaphysical potential. It just is written kind of backwards. So you have to play with the syntax. This is totally fine for a tantric because all ritual grammar is a syntax. It's made in choices. So Why am I bringing this up? I do think, though, we should be careful about the way we speak reality into the world. I try and be careful. I try not to put things that are limiting to other people. I might be self-deprecating and limiting in myself, which is probably a mistake, but, I we all do the best we can to move through the waters of this, samsaric existence. So, I think that that's why I invoked apophenia. I think that I want all of you to have higher knowledge, not hopefully not psychosis, obviously, but just watch Evangelion because it explains that sort of process of consciousness very well. The characters are very emo and depressive, and at times sort of stuck in their own misperceptions and sort of fears of the world, of which are somewhat valid too. And I think we're all feeling that in the current astrological cycle. Of course, don't let the planets affect your personal mood. If you can, the best way to do this, in my opinion, is through mantra recitation, Tantra in particular. You don't need anything complicated. You just need yourself and your mala and your time. Just bring those three things together and recite, recite, recite. And basically you're Buddhist. Like that is what Buddhism is. That's where the primordial ground will arise for you. So hopefully everybody can experience that. They can, they don't have to listen to what I say about the tree or what I say about Dharma. They can actually experience it for themselves. So that's what I wanted to say. Don't You have to follow the text and you also have to follow the experiential wisdom. It's not about eschewing either one. It's rather bringing both into synthesis. That's a true middle path endeavor. So that's what I want to end on for my part. I'm sorry, Dawnlander. I went on for a really long time without passing over the mic. I hope you didn't aren't mad at me. I really appreciate that you came and that you stuck it out. And I'm so glad this was your first space. Um, and anything else, I mean, I couldn't speak highly enough of you. I would consider you my friend and also like a mutual that I really do care about. And no one is allowed to bully him, and if they do, they have to deal with me, and nobody wants to deal with me, even my friends. So let me just say that right at the front. But Dawnlander, please say anything you want to say in response to where I brought us.
No, absolutely. And if I were just riffing by myself, I would have truly no idea how to give your audience the best experience. So, thank you very much for bringing your wealth of ideas and sort of interpreting kind of this. I feel like I was just giving you a little bit of raw intellectual material, but you actually interpreted and brought it into a lot more of a general and sort of dynamic understanding that I think people can benefit from a lot more. But no, it was an excellent selection of book. I you know I always sort of thought of apophenia. I mean, before I learned the word, and this is the first time I learned the word is by looking at this book. But it always sort of struck me as almost the condition for whether or not I accept an idea or I accept a text is that it has to feel to me that I had forgotten it, and that now when I see it, I'm reminded of some truth that I used to know, or some blood memory, I guess you could say. So I no, it was. I don't think I have too much more to add. I should probably sign off pretty soon, but it was really a pleasure. It was really excellent to be on here. Obviously, I consider you a very great friend as well, and I just learned so much hanging around the Grey Lodge. I definitely would encourage anyone interested to stalk Jin a little bit, not actually, but to check out his Twitter page. And there's the deeper you look, the more connections and wisdom. I feel like there's no topic that he's left untouched. So it's been very beneficial, profitable, and fruitful for me to have met you, and obviously not just in a cold instrumental way, but you're an excellent person, and thank you so much for having me on and letting me talk my stem cell jibber jabber. So it was great to be here.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for tolerating that. I feel like I can't even really say anything better than that because it's like honestly so flattering, and I do really consider you a friend. Like that wasn't a bit or anything. Obviously, you know this, and so like a true friend, like a great friend that I happened upon through we'll say through the Octarine colors. I told you this privately. I hope you won't get mad at me for saying this because it is kind of funny. But I thought you were a Burmese accountant at first, simply because of that seemed like your primary interest was in like the Witsa. I found out later why. So that obviously made sense, but I wasn't sure. I was like, because I have a people from the diaspora tend to like me because I kind of bring some more hidden as wisdom science to, I guess, to podcasting. And it's not, I'm not the usual presenter of those ideas. Like I'm not someone who like went and spent like 10 years as a monk in Thailand, right? I come at it from like being diaspora. I come at it from being mixed race. I come at it from like a magic perspective, a more, I would say, we'll call it a mixed magical perspective, both East and West together. So I have what I'm trying to say is I have a lot of people from the diaspora that do say like what you're doing is really cool. Like nobody can really do it. And if you have really, if you come from a really Asian family, I'm not doing that thing, the trauma thing that a lot of second generation people do. But if you there aren't a lot of Asian podcasters, and there certainly are not a lot of Asian occultists like in this sphere, and there's a reason for that. And so part of the whole project was for me to explore this Hyperborean ideas, which I had since the very, very beginning. It was way pre podcast, but I wanted to sort of explore those ideas in terms of metaphysics, and I didn't know how. So I would like to think that my resulting friendship with Dawnlander is actually like the sort of octarine colors showing us each other, and we could recognize each other in perception. So I just want to say that, and I won't be long-winded. But everybody, like and subscribe. Please check out Solar Exile, Joshua the Branch, Eros to Ethos, and of course Dawnlander. I'm gonna bully Dawnlander to come on the show, onto Saints. You'll see, it's gonna happen. I'm putting it out there on recording for a reason. But anyways, all three of those other co-hosts all have upcoming episodes as well. Well, Solar has two, Joshua has one, Eros has one, but it's a part two. It's going to be a two-parter. So everybody can go listen to them, go listen to their own Substacks, their own Twitter, their own feed. If you want to follow me, I don't know why you would, but Dawnlander laid it out pretty nice for me, I have to say. Yeah, maybe if I'm in the mood to post, you will get a little something that is interesting for you. So I hope that's what I do. I don't think I'm an excellent person. I think I'm I'm a threshold saint. I'm constantly in the process of becoming. I consider myself pretty dynamic. I have a lot of flaws, a lot of aggregates. If you listen to this show since the very beginning, you will hear my interactions with people. People have come and gone. It is what it is. So, I try and just keep that Promethean flame. It's not really Promethean, it's apophenic. I try and keep that flame of the, octarine colors alive, and carry that torch through the reality as we understand it. So, thank you to Cassandra and Vanessa and everyone else who came to the chat. The new channel has been a pretty great success. Like I'm not trying to be like a monetized YouTuber or anything like that. That like makes me kind of nauseated, and like I couldn't live with that. Anyways, the point is I'm really glad that, that at least like we've got our core audience back, and that the episodes are doing so well, and I'm really happy with everything. So thank you guys so much for liking and subscribing. I know that doesn't really matter in a way, but it does actually show that what we're doing is interesting, at least to 500 to 1,000 people every episode. So there's sort of no, I would say, greater that's the whole reason to do it, is not really to, is not for the audience, and it isn't really for the views, but it's for the connections. As I was saying, the Zodis and the Russias, who are both the same, they have to meet each other. And right now we're all on the aether wave, and we meet each other through the aether wave, through time and space. So that's pretty much what I have. And so thank you, everybody. And I hope everybody picks up this book. I think it's great. Is it going to teach you magic? I don't know. What is magic anyway? Maybe magic is the non-dual gnosis that we make along the way. That's what I think. So everybody can try and get there, and or just or not try, but maybe just let it go and let it happen. Silver Surfers, quick Silver Surfers, right? So, anyways, thank you guys so much, and next week, Michael Hudson, the Temples of Enterprise, Temples of Enterprise. That will be a big space. Hopefully, Dawnlander will come back. Hopefully, we'll get Seth on. Everybody's looking forward to it. Solar will be there. Eros will be there. I, of course, will be there. I don't know about Joshua. We'll see. And yeah, and then we are continuing the speculative anthropologies of magic. We are doing Father Blackhawk and the Indian Saints. That'll be the week after, and then we'll do like 1 week on, 1 week off for book club, and we'll continue with the speculative anthropologies of magic. So we're going to do, first will be Indian Saints, then it will be Borderland Saints, and then it will be San Mashimon from Guatemala. And hopefully we'll get CJ Colby, my frequent Tantra collaborator. Obviously, his episode just dropped with Solar on my show, Sinister Forces. Everybody check it out. It's pretty good. Yeah, you can check that out. And hopefully he'll come up for the San Mashimon episode, because it was kind of like him and I riffing back and forth about like the ideas that we could do. So I'm just trying to make time until we get to the 17, because I have to have my magic number. That's kind of, you talk about like what young Jinsky's Kabbalah looks like. It is in a way very informed by the formal logic of numbers, but I try not to be super constrained by it, because normally I would go and say like 222, but I won't. I've tortured Dawnlander enough, and I've kept the audience here long enough, but I greatly appreciate everybody. Psychic self-defense, super important. Discernment of reality. Don't allow other people to infect or impact your reality through their will. Make sure that the things that you do are of your own agency and your own will. I know that this is held in relative degrees, because that's the archonic multiverse that we find ourselves in. But again, don't black pill, because there is a motherfucking gate out. Okay. Thanks, guys. Everybody have a great night.